I'd like to first call on Bini Zomer from Noble Energy, because I understand there's some big news in the natural gas industry.
I think we've been big news for a long time. I think if I compare this year to last year when I appeared at this conference, that this year there's good news. And we are in the midst of moving forwards toward a final investment decision on Leviathan development, something we're hoping to get to by the end of this year. And we've signed now contracts with customers in Jordan. We're moving forward additional contracts both domestically and regionally in Egypt, beginning to have conversations in Turkey. And by the end of this year, beginning of next, we will be well on our way towards the $4 billion investment in the Leviathan project, which will provide energy security for Israel. It will provide a cleaner environment and economic benefits and geopolitical benefits in this region and beyond when we export to Europe as well.
Thanks, Bini. Ohad Cohen, tell us a little bit about the areas that our audience may not know in which Israel has the so-called qualitative edge.
Thank you. As Israel, from economic perspective, is like an island, and it's a small market. At the end, we are only 8 million people. We are very noisy, but we are very small. We have to focus on niche areas. And someone said that necessity is mother of all innovation. So Israel had to develop agro-technology industry, and therefore we have very pioneering agro-technology industry. The same goes with water. Water technology, drip irrigation was invented in Israel. As a result of necessity, we simply do not have enough water. The Prime Minister was speaking about cybersecurity. Over there, we definitely see a boom in the number of companies that are being coming out every day. We see new technologies, and it's a very vibrant area. I think that those three areas are areas where we will see a growth, we will see more companies, and this is something we can contribute to the world. Someone said about Tikkun Olam. I think that these are areas where Israel can truly contribute, not only for the export and for the Israeli economy, but also for the global economy.
Thank you. Shai Babad, it's a very Jewish question. How's business? How's the state of the Israeli economy?
Well, thank you very much for hosting me here today, this morning, to begin with, and good morning to everybody, or good afternoon already. When I look at the Israeli economy and we are examining it, I think most of the indicators are really well. So we're looking at growth, which we just published the results of 3.2% growth in the third quarter. It was 4.9% in the second quarter. It's much higher than we actually anticipated or forecasted in the beginning. When we are looking at unemployment is at a record levels low of 4.8, 4.7%, which is also very good. Participation rate is high. When we looked at debt to GDP ratio, debt to GDP ratio is reducing. We look at very responsible fiscal rules and a deficit which is very, very low, but we still have a lot of challenges. And when we are now actually sitting here in the Israeli parliament, we are passing these days the 2017-2018 budget for the next 2 years. And this budget embeds the numbers, but it also embeds all the reforms that Minister Kahlon, Minister of Finance, is leading here in Israel. And there are three major cores of challenges which we are dealing today in the Israeli economy. The first is how to have a continuous and flourishing growth, and that has also to do with productivity, because when we look at growth, Israel is very strong, but when we look at productivity, Israel compared to the OECD is approximately 25-30% below. The second is about cost of living. 2011 riots that came into the streets of half a million people going and protesting against the high cost of living in Israel has sent its signals to the Israeli government. And there's been many steps and still continuous steps that the government is taking in order to make sure that we will continue to reduce cost of living in Israel, because it's a major issue, with the flag of Minister Moshe Kahlon being the housing and reducing cost of housing in Israel. And the third, which I think is not less important, is how we close the gaps, in the inequality gaps in the Israeli economy. According to the Gini parameter, we are starring but not being the best. We are very much below, and we are trying to improve our number from being number 53, I think, current numbers, to getting higher, to a higher number where we close those gaps between the lower income and the higher income population. And I think that will also have its effect on education and on, at the end of the day, participation in the labor force and the productivity. So all those circles today are being combined. There's a lot of issues that are being dealt, and this is what we're pushing today in the 2017-2018 yearly budget.
Thank you. Yair Sarusi, as chairman of the board of Israel's biggest bank, how do you see the future of banking?
Well, let me first say that I'm very glad to be here. I came to Bank Hapoalim 7.5 years ago in a time of crisis in the bank. And we were number 2 at the time. We are back to be by far number 1. And when I looked at the stock market as of today, the stock is at the highest price ever. So I'm also very glad about it. And I can tell you that since I joined the bank, the stock of Bank Hapoalim went up 132%, while the average of banking was less than 40 and our competitor is 47. So I'm first of all very pleased with the results. Now, how do you make it? I want to say a word about it. The first plan when I came, I called it back to basics. And the idea was that we must deal with different populations. And we should be the bank of the people, go back to our basis as Bank Hapoalim that was founded by 2 people. One of them was David Ben-Gurion, and bring it back to be the best bank. And the second thing, which I started later on, we call it now the new plan of Bank Hapoalim, is called People and Technology. And the idea is really that it's all about people, guys. Management is about people, leadership is about people, and we serve the people. So we have to touch each one of them. And we have to have the best technology. And you heard before my CEO speaking about the JV with Technion. So myself, a guy that started in the treasury, like this guy, then moving into Morgan Stanley and other private businesses, having my own funds for 16 years, and then coming to Bank Hapoalim, taking all this experience, I really feel that we can do a lot in this country just by cooperation with each other. Instead of fighting with each other, we should cooperate with each other as we do with Technion, as we do with other research institutes, as we do with other companies in this country. That's the only way for us to explore ideas and to be more clever than our worldwide competitors. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, and if I can ask you to answer briefly, so how's business between Israel and Europe? How's trade? And also last year you talked about labeling settlement products. How has that developed over the last year?
Well, the general economic situation between the EU and Israel is great, and trade is improving and growing by the day. On the issues of the settlement products, I mean, we have to keep a sense of proportion here. We have, as I said before, a 30 billion euro trade between us. Settlement products is, on a good day, maybe 200 million or something like that a year. So, I mean, it's minuscule in the larger picture. But our policy remains the same. The settlements are not part of Israel, at least not for now. And for that reason, well, I mean, that's your view. But that we have an agreement with Israel within its 67 lines. And products from Israel coming from Israel proper is given concessional customs treatment on the European market, but not products coming from another territory which we don't consider part of Israel. So it's as simple as that. But in economic terms, it's a minuscule problem or issue.
Okay, thank you. I think there's time for one more question each. So, Ohad Cohen, let's start with you. I understand the issue of free trade agreements has come up a lot, including in the US elections. I understand Israel has a unique position on this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Israel is trying to diversify its markets abroad, while the EU is and will remain a very important trading partner for Israel. When we look at the growth engines, the global growth engines, we have to look east and south. Therefore, we started negotiating free trade area agreements, and just for the sake of the audience, a free trade agreement is an agreement that reduces customs duties on both sides, meaning if the Israeli exporter would like to export to the other country where we have a free trade agreement, it means that it will export duty-free and vice versa. So it is a win-win situation for the consumer in Israel and for the Israeli exporter. So we started negotiating free trade area agreements with China recently. It started in September. 2 weeks ago, we started with the customs union of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. We started this year as well with South Korea, with Vietnam. We started a few years ago with India. It's over there, like our friends from the EU, it's very challenging. And with the Ukraine. So we have, all in all, about 6 trade agreements that are being negotiating in order to diversify our exports and to develop new markets for our exporters.
Thank you. Shai Babad, what do you think is the greatest challenge facing the Israeli economy in the coming years?
Well, I don't think there's one major challenge, but there's a few. I mentioned before, I think productivity is a major challenge for the Israeli economy. I mean,
What about declining exports?
Are you talking about when it comes to exports? I think that the Brexit and what happens with the Brexit is definitely going to be a challenge for us, and we have to see what are the opportunities. I think that we'll have to look at our local industry and to see, on the one hand, we want a free competition and we want to make sure that imports can come into Israel, reduce customs and reduce quotas, but on the other hand, we want to protect the local industry so we'll be able to export and export as much as we can. So we will need to see how and in which ways it's correct for Israel to support its export and its industry here. I think it will be a challenge to see how much we can increase our trade with Asia, which is also a major and dominant trade between, and it's an open, very good open, vibrant market for Israel. And I think it's mostly we'll have to deal with how we, on the one hand, encourage competition and encourage imports into Israel and reduce all the regulation and the customs on the one hand, but on the other hand, support the local industry here so it can continue to compete and compete in a good way with exports.
Yair Sarusi, you mentioned this, but I'd like you to expand a little bit because the Bank Hapoalim is expanding its role as just a financial institution into other areas, including of social responsibility. And of course, we mentioned the Technion-Cornell agreement. What is the purpose of a bank expanding in these different areas?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, that when you are the major bank, you must deal with all the society, and you have to really feel part of it. So, for example, being the guy in charge of all our programs in philanthropy, one of the things that I did was really to ask each branch to have his own program locally, meaning is in its own neighborhood. This was several years ago. As of today, because people like it, because the managers and the team likes it, now we have 2 or 3 programs for each branch in their own neighborhood. So as much as you do, you engage your people, you engage the people and your clients. You must work with this, you must think about it. There is a conflict. Since the 2008 crisis, people in the world feel that there is, I would say, a distance between them and corporates, governments and others, and you must try and see how do you break it, how do you really speak to them in your own voice. You cannot really play any games, you have to be real. If you're not real, you are out of the game. I hope we are able to convince people, and until now we were, that we are for real, that we know how to make it and we want to give them the best service. So this is really, but regarding your macro question, I must say one thing. We are in a very competitive world. Sometimes in Israel, being isolated, being in this region, we forget it. We only think about what is happening here in Jerusalem or here in Tel Aviv. But we must, as government, as treasury, think that we are only part of a big piece that has many influences. And in order to keep the growth in this country, you must keep the private sector in a way that they also feel that this is an attractive place to continue to build the new factories, not to move it to other locations. They can be competitive here, but people need to feel that the uncertainty, the bureaucracy is being reduced. I see this as a major issue for this government, It could be done. Israel is in a very good macro situation at the moment. That's the time to think about how do we bring back also the business people into the game. Thank you.
Thank you for that really important point, Shai.
Yeah, just to remark on that, I think it was a very, very good remark that Mr. Sarusi just made. There's partially a conception that the government is here in order to stop the businesses or to guard the people from the businesses, and that the businesses are responsible for the high cost of living or for the concentration in the Israeli market. I would like here to state and say very, very clear that's not the case. The one who will promote growth, the one who will make sure that there is a vibrant growth in Israel and will push productivity and will make Israel as a vibrant economy is the private sector. We as government, we don't create technologies, we don't create work of places. We do create work of places, but I'm not sure those are the productive ones who want to help the economy to grow. And we do need, and we must facilitate a very strong and vibrant private sector in order to push growth. So our role is, and I heard a lecture done by Michael Eisenberg just a few days ago. He's the head of Benchmark here in Israel, and he said regulators should start to think more as enablers than regulators. And I think that change of mind is something that the government should also seek. When we find that there's a misuse of power, when there's a concentration and things we have to deal with, yes, we must legislate and we will legislate. But where otherwise, we must create the tools and the working ground, the basic tools for the private sector to prevail, for the private sector to grow, and for the private sector to work in an open economy. This is the only way that we can actually push growth and productivity. And we must do that on the one hand, and for sure, make the legislation, the regulation hard when there is monopolies or where there's a bad use of power.
Thank you. I think that's a nice segue, Bini Zomer, to the natural gas industry. The government approved it. It was partially blocked by the High Court, and yet this is a potential game changer. How will Israel's natural gas exploration boost its image across the world?
Well, first of all, I was optimistic before I came, but after I heard Shai speak about the role of regulators in the future, I'm even more optimistic, because I think that's exactly what needs to happen here. I think too oftentimes, and you hear it in the responses of the press and in the press of the people who are out protesting, that if the regulators have come up with a solution that allows business to move forward, they haven't done their jobs. And I think that's not the role of the regulators. The role of the regulators is to ensure that business can move forward and create the jobs and advance the economy. And so I'm very heartened to hear Shai say that, and I hope that that is the path forward, because it's going to need to be the path forward for us to move forward in our project and have gas delivered here at the end of 2019 from Leviathan. I think oftentimes, and again, we see Noble Energy, we have a purpose. As we say, we're energizing the world, bettering people's lives. And we've seen that in Israel really more than we have in a lot of places. We supply today electricity gas for 60% of Israel's electricity production. We're soon going to be exporting gas to Jordan, to Egypt, to Turkey. We saw the natural gas, or the possibility of getting gas from Israel to Turkey as a prime motivator in the reconciliation talks between Israel and Turkey, and we're excited about that opportunity. I think, though, we have to remember that the natural gas, like all business, is a tool in bringing people together. It doesn't solve all problems that need to be solved in other ways, but there's no doubt that when I'm sitting in Jordan and speaking to people in the royal court there about bringing gas from Israel, or we sit with the Palestinians of providing natural gas to a power facility in Jenin or even to Gaza, that there's no doubt that gas will play a role in creating relationships which will allow the diplomatic front to improve as well. And so while it doesn't solve the problems, it does create an avenue for talks and for relationships under which those problems can be solved.
Okay, I think you'll all agree this has been a fascinating panel. I'd like to thank all of you for... thank you so much.